Hello, welcome back to the channel. So I feel like balance has become an even bigger point of discussion than ever, especially with 4.0 probably bringing us even stronger characters than we have now. And I am in kind of two minds about this. On one hand, a lot of the newer characters are just so much better than a lot of the older ones that the huge gap can make a lot of the content feel bad if you aren't using them. But I think the problem isn't even like that they have bad kits or like are actually that bad. It's just that they don't really feel great to play in a lot of the content. The only characters, at least out of the limited 5 stars, I would say are actually bad is like Sealy, who was just so outdated at this point, and the fact that she has not gotten a buff yet is insane. And Babida Lune, who just feels way too much of a commitment for not getting that much payoff, and Archer just fills the same role but way better. And Ratio, who has a very similar problem of requiring way too much setup for what you get out of him. Like, the others I would say are either okay or actually really good. Even Break, I think, is not as bad as people make it out to be, but I think it is the one that is kind of on the edge and could use some help, so hopefully Dahlia will at least help it out somewhat, but I'm a bit doubtful, honestly. I just think, like, the bar for power is so high now that if a character is just good, that is just not enough for a lot of people because they're either broken or just bad. I feel like is the view that a lot of people have. And I say limited 5 stars since a lot of the standard characters in 4 stars were just not even that good when they came out, and honestly I'm kind of doubtful that they would ever receive a buff. And I will be honest, I think part of this mainly comes from zero cycling being the standard for a lot of people. And I will be honest, I hate that standard. I think it skews people's perception of how good and bad characters actually are, and it makes it so that every time a new character is coming out, people will always say that they're bad before they even come out, and then they come out, and then they end up being good. And then this cycle has happened with almost every single F4S character, and it gets really annoying. But for the average player, zero cycling does not matter. All that matters is, can you get the max amount of stars and get all the rewards? And I think most characters, at least from the 2.0 onward, can do that. Now, does that mean that none of them could use help? No, like I said, Break does feel like it is kind of on the edge, or even someone like Jing Yuan, who always feels like he's so close to being really good, and just constantly gets buffed, but is still just not quite at that level, you know? So, like, I do think, like, getting buffs for characters would be good, but I also don't think they're as bad as some people might think that they are. But the core problem is more that they just don't feel great to play in comparison to the newer characters. So even if they might not be that bad, they just feel a lot worse in the newer content compared to the newer characters. So a lot of people will just be like, oh yeah, they're just not that good. Because their actual kits are fine, it's just that playing them feels a lot worse. Obviously some characters will always be better than others, that's just always going to be a thing. Arlen will probably always be the worst character in the game. But in my opinion, every character should at least feel good to play, which the devs have not really been helping that much with. The only time we got buffs was in 3.4, and it showed that doing buffs can help a lot. You know, Kafka definitely got the best of it, though High Silence coming out did definitely help a lot with, you know, Dot coming back. But also, you know, Silverwolf is pretty good now. It's just an overall debuffer, and Blade and Jingli, while not like amazing, are definitely a lot better than they were before. But we have not gotten any word since on when or if we will even get more buffs. Which, like, I do get it, like, at least now for this patch, because of all the other stuff that's going on. But at least, like, in the past, like, patches, if they were like, if they just said, hey, we're working on buffs, but we just don't have a confirmed time for when they will come out, at least that would be something, you know, because people won't just have to be left in the dark of if we will even get them or not. But, like, besides just how the characters feel, I think the problem also comes from the boss design really favoring the newer characters. I will be honest, I have not really liked the bosses in version 3 that much at all, besides, like, a couple of them. They all feel designed to just be beaten by one character, and, like, we have had bosses in the past that obviously are countered by specific characters. That's how most bosses are. Like, you know, Death with Dot. But they didn't feel like the only good option, you know? Maybe in, like, Anomaly Aberration, but that's just kind of has its own set of problems. Pollux, I think, is the most egregious example of this, where if you don't have a character that, like, uses their own HP, you're going to do so little damage, and because of how much HP it has, he's just so limiting to fight, that, like, if you just don't have an answer, he takes forever and is so obnoxious. It's kind of the same thing, but I don't think quite as bad with the Ecor Memo Sprite, and, like, shields, though, you know, because Dan is free, it's not quite as bad, though I still don't really like bosses that basically force you to just bring one specific thing. Like, just a lot of the bosses in general feel like they have almost the same exact strategy of just using big AoE damage and win, which is why basically all of the really good characters right now are all just like AoE nuke type of characters, and that just makes it feel very limiting on what can actually be used to beat them well. Like, it's why I think the best boss of version 3 is Nicodor, because his mechanics are not like really that restrictive of what can be good against him. Obviously AoE is still decent against him because of the, you know, like steals your HP and summons the statues, but that's not like the only thing that's good against him, you know? But also the other problem is really just the endgame design, which I've talked so much about, so I will try to keep this a bit shorter, but especially with MOC and Anomaly Operation, the buffs are just way too limiting and geared towards like the newer characters or just a specific playstyle in general. So if you don't have like characters that will go with the buffs, you're kind of just out of luck, unless you have a character that is just insanely strong. Obviously, other games like do this, but I feel like the buffs there are not as like strong as the ones in Star Realm, or like are not as important. Obviously, you should want to use the buffs, but they shouldn't be so strong that if you can't interact with them, you basically just lose. I think like this is why people like, you know, so like Pure Fiction and especially APOC way more, and why, you know, I personally think APOC is the best mode, since you have variety of like what different buffs you can do. So there's a lot of different characters that can be good there, and they actually, you know, change the way that a lot of the bosses work to make them not as annoying to play. Are there some misses in there? Yeah, but I would say overall that's more rare, and usually the boss does feel better. So overall, I do think balance is important, since power creep is a pretty big problem for a lot of people, especially people that have been playing since the earlier days and have some of the older characters like Silly or Mbappe de Lune. But I will say, like, having some power creep in the game, I think it is good, because, you know, it keeps things exciting. It doesn't just feel like stuff is just kind of stagnated, because if every character was the exact same power level, that would be kind of boring, honestly. Like, newer characters are the biggest part of a patch, so having them feel really strong is good, because the opposite is way worse, since having a new character just be bad immediately kills all kind of hype. I think Currency Wars has shown that people do enjoy the combat of this game. They just want their characters to feel just more enjoyable to play. So if we just get more buffs and adjusted the endgame more, I don't think this would be nearly as big of a problem. Now, that being said, I would rather them more focus on just giving us more content than worrying a huge amount about balance, because the game's always going to be kind of unbalanced. That's just the nature of these kind of games. Obviously do some changes, especially, you know, buffs for characters that people have been asking for, but the game really just needs more content in general. Like, only having 2 events next patch, even disregarding the 2-week extension, even if it was just a normal patch size, is just not enough at all. And there being nothing to do makes people focus a lot more on other problems and just get way more annoyed by them than they might otherwise. Just focus on more content before worrying a huge amount about balance, I think. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.